recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel at a later date. The link to watch it will be posted at wmrc.edu. And as a reminder, again, I ask all participants to remain muted and to keep their cameras off during the presentation. We will have a Q&A afterwards where you can either raise your hand or ask a question in the chat. Firstly, I would like to give a land acknowledgement. UC-WMRC acknowledges the Numu, Paiute, and Niue Shoshone as the first peoples and traditional land stewards of Paiute and Coho, the Owens Valley and White Mountains. As a facility managed by a land grant institution, we pay our respects to the elders and relations of past, present, and emerging. With that being said, I would like to introduce this evening's speaker. David Lee is a well-known local independent rock art researcher, author, co-founder of Western Rock Art Research, and former WMRC staff. Tonight, he will be presenting again about his work titled Rock Art East of the Range of Light, One Piece of a Global Puzzle, in which he will discuss his long-term research and documentation of rock art in the Eastern Sierra region and American West, and how it compares to Australian Aboriginal art. David, you have the podium.
Okay. Okay, is that working?
Yes, it is.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Let's see, I got to click off a couple things here. Before I get started, there are a couple of things I would like to point out. First of all, I am only presenting an archaeological perspective about the rock art here. I would not presume to present any of the perspective or opinions of Paiute people about this. That's for them to do. So this is just my perspective as someone who's documented rock art and who is studying it. Along with that, there's a couple other things I need to talk about at the beginning here. First is that I've been doing this a long time, but I'm barely scratching the surface. And the field of rock art research is barely scratching the surface, and anthropology is barely scratching the surface. There's so much left to learn. And to go along with that, I will be oversimplifying things a lot in the talk tonight. All talks about groups of people, language groups, and even individuals are oversimplified. So expect that. And along with that, I have to bring up something else that right now we're at a point where lawmakers are introducing laws to make it illegal to teach theories in school. So if you think about that for just a minute, that's effectively stopping teaching science in school, because all science is theories. And we seem to not understand anymore that there's a big difference between data, facts, and opinions. And I want to go over very quickly that tonight I will be presenting data that I and others have collected. I'm going to be presenting analysis that we have made of that data, and I have made of that data, interpretations that I am making based on that analysis. And I will try to tell you whenever I'm then giving you my opinion about that interpretation, but it's on you to use critical thinking to decide when someone is giving you an opinion or is presenting data. And if someone is making any argument without presenting data and explaining to you where you can go find that data and look at how it was collected, how it was analyzed, how it was interpreted, then they're just trying to sell you something. So keep in mind that literally 99% of everything that's on the internet, which is trying to sell you something, is just made up. They are not presenting any data. So along with that, I will start the show, but actually before I get started, there are a few groups that I would like to thank as well. First and foremost, of course, I would like to thank the Paiute and Shoshone people of the Owens Valley and their ancestors who took such great care of this land before we came here, and who we could learn an awful lot from if we would just be quiet and listen. I would also like to very much thank, my slides stalled. I would very much like to thank the White Mountain Research Center. It was my home for many, many years and continues to be a big source of inspiration and a big source of support for me and for the work that we do. And that means in thanking, well, here we go. The next slide real quick. Bureau of Land Management in the U.S. Forest Service. I have been so fortunate and blessed to be able to work with some very committed, hard-working people who have devoted their lives to protecting these resources. This is just 3 of them. There are a bunch of others that I should have pictures of, but don't. But I've been so fortunate to be able to work with people like these. And they need our support. And lastly, but not leastly, I would like to thank all of you for your interest and for joining us here tonight when there's so many other things you could be doing, like skiing out under the moonlight tonight around here or something. But as Gayleen said, I am a co-founder and field manager for a very small nonprofit group called Western Rock Art Research. We are dedicated to documenting rock art and other archaeological resources for both research and management and education purposes. And tonight we're talking about the Owens Valley, that to most people who are just passing through think of it as a big desert valley in between the 2 big mountain ranges. And it can be very dry, but on a good year like the year we're having right now, and many times in the past, this has been literally a Garden of Eden with so much vegetation and so much wildlife going on at all the various ecosystems up and down the valley and up and down from the bottom of the valley to the top of the mountain ranges. But even when it's dry, the Owens Valley has always had perennial water. And that's no doubt one of the main things that drew early Native Americans here, and they've lived here for thousands of years, producing thousands of images on the rocks around here. And that's the most visible sign that we have of all those millennium of occupation here in the Owens Valley. A lot we can learn from it. This is what Wikipedia has down as the extent of the Owens Valley. I would probably stop it a little further south and maybe not put Chalfont and Hamel and Benton Valley out there up into it, but generally that's the Owens Valley. We're nestled between the White Mountains and the Sierra Nevada, and about 75% of the petroglyphs of the rock art in the Owens Valley is really concentrated in about 1/10 of the Owens Valley, the volcanic tableland in the north end of the valley, just north of Bishop. It's about 150 square miles. And like I said, probably about 3/4 or so of the rock art that we know of in the Owens Valley is concentrated out on the volcanic tableland, which is a result of the eruption of the Long Valley caldera about 3/4 million years ago, I believe. And I was first attracted to the Owens Valley for the mountains. I really dreamed of finding a job at the top of the mountains and where I could support myself living and working up there and focus on being an artist. And life had other things in mind for me. I was very, very lucky to get hired finally after years of begging Dave Tridall, who was the director at that time, to hire me. He finally took a chance and hired me. I will forever be grateful. It was a golden time to be working up at the White Mountains in those years. It was also when Dr. Bob Bettinger and his field classes were doing their explorations of the high altitude village sites. And it was just a huge inspiration and just blew my mind that people could live up at such an elevation. And it wasn't nearly as inspiring, however, as meeting my wife to be at the top of the mountains. Together, we were both fascinated by the work that Dr. Bettinger was doing, by the archaeology all out on the landscape. And we were in love with just exploring and checking out all the landscape, all the mountains and valleys around the Owens Valley. After 10 years of working together at the White Mountains, we were lucky enough to spend over 20 years together as what we now call citizen scientists, helping to add to our knowledge of something and aiding academia in learning about a subject. In this case, it was rock art. And the way that happened was that we had fallen in love with the country and with the images that we found out on it and learning more about the cultures that made it. And then we were horrified to see all the vandalism and graffiti that was going on. And so as a result, this became our focus in life for a very long time. And I will explain how that happened as we go on in this talk. The main thing that happened was that after 10 years of working up here, we were offered jobs at the Granite Mountains Reserve in the eastern Mojave, and went down there and found out that we were asked to be stewards of a place that had a huge amount of small painted rock shelters. It was an amazing place. It gave us access to a whole other array of ecosystems and access to not only the Mojave, but into the Southwest. But I was very much struck at the time that the rock art there seemed to be nearly identical to the rock art that we have here in the Owens Valley. To my eye, it looked very, very similar. There are more paintings, pictographs down in the Mojave Desert, but other than that, it is still basically the same type of elements: wavy lines, straight lines, circles in all combinations, some animals such as bighorn sheep and deer, a number of human-like figures that we call anthropomorphs, but lots and lots of circles and wavy lines in every configuration imaginable. And then when you look at the rock art up here in the Great Basin, it's exactly the same stuff, really, that we call this type of rock art. It's been given the name, more of a tradition rather than a single style, because other styles have grown out of it, including the Coso style that's south of the Owens Valley here. And there are, within this Great Basin and Mojave tradition, there are a number of bighorn sheep and deer, not that many deer, and some anthropomorphs, but a very small percentage. And we've given this, what used to be called Great Basin Abstract, the name of the Western Archaic tradition. Certain places, the Coso style is the main one that comes to mind, grew out of this Western Archaic tradition, and I believe holds a disproportionate hold on the public consciousness, who I think most people believe that most of the rock art out there is hunting scenes and human figures and things like this, and that's just not the case. That's not what the archaeological record shows. So we do know that rock art like this was made going back a very long time in South Central Oregon. A style of this tradition of rock art called the Great Basin carved style exists in South Central Oregon, and Cannon and Ricks did some great work up there showing that several panels like this one that are completely covered with glyphs, the bottom of that panel goes down into the dirt below an ash level that was laid down by the eruption of Mount Mazama at what's now Crater Lake, about 7,000 years ago. And so this rock art has been made beginning somewhere earlier than 7,000 years ago. And this is not one of the panels, but it was like those panels. And we also believe that a good proportion of this rock art was made right up into the time of contact, and even some of it post-contact. In many places there are European figures, equestrian figures. We just don't have any of those in the rock art record here in the Owens Valley. So while we were in the Granite Mountains in the Mojave, we met and became students and proteges of Don Christensen, who is a driving force in the rock art of Western North America, and who has inspired many, many people during his two main careers: education and rock art research. He is best known for his work in the Southwest, I think, to a lot of people. We went and helped him record, along with a bunch of other people, some sites in the Southwest, but mainly we worked with him in the Mojave. And if you were to read just one book on rock art, regional rock art of North America anywhere, I would highly recommend this fantastic book right here, based on 25 plus years of research. It's a fantastic book and it really lays it out for you. Can't recommend it enough. Since I'm on the subject, I have to recommend this book right here, hot off the press, Rock Art of the World by Jeff Lefebvre. It's an incredible book. It's available. Go look for it online. It really is an amazing book. If you only read one book on the rock art of the world, it really should be this one. And if you only read one book on rock art of the Owens Valley and east of the Range of Light, it really should be our book, this book right here, which is only available at the 2 museums here in the Owens Valley, and if you contact me. So in 1981, Charlotte and I moved back from the Granite Mountains and decided to focus on documenting rock art here in the Owens Valley, which we had done some of, but we had also been working in a lot of other places, and were then to go on and do work in Australia. So these are the different areas where Don Christensen and his students, proteges, recorded rock art. He went on to, and his group of Grand Canyon people went on to recording rock art in the Grand Canyon, while Charlotte and I focused on the Owens Valley and doing this work in Australia. But these are the different areas where we documented rock art, have documented rock art in the last 26 or 27 years. As I mentioned, and if you want to learn more about this, you can go to my other talk that's on the White Mountain Research Center YouTube channel. We were incredibly fortunate to be able to go work in the top end of Australia, working with the Wardaman people and with other researchers in a couple other areas of Northern Australia. Gave me some insights and I think a different perspective on rock art. So the Owens Valley is well known for the incredible natural beauty, geology, the vibrant ecosystems from the bottom of the valley all the way up the elevational slopes of both the mountain ranges on either side. But it's also a giant open air museum, a window back in time through thousands of years of human occupation in the Owens Valley, with still an almost untouched view shed in all directions, that you can really imagine that this is what the view that the people 5,000, 10,000 years ago may have had something similar to this. There are a large number of village sites. There are other smaller traces that are harder to see, and a lot of artifacts still out there as well. We're in the process of just at the beginning process really of doing survey throughout the BLM and the Forest Service lands. And I have to bring up artifacts here, that it has long been a historical pastime in the Owens Valley to collect artifacts, but we know better now. And in addition to being illegal, it's also incredibly disrespectful to the Paiute and Shoshone people and their ancestors. And it's also stealing from the future of all mankind, that there's a page torn out of the history of the Owens Valley that is forever lost to all future humans because somebody picked up a rock and went and put it on their mantle. And we should never forget that the most important knowledge that we can learn from the traditional values and knowledge that the Paiute and Shoshone people still have and still pass on generation after generation. And we could learn from them if we would just, as I said, stop and listen to them. And along with that, I have to mention that the way the Paiute language is having, from my perspective, a big resurgence, and has for quite a while now, that more and more people of all ages are learning to be fluent in Paiute. There are classes up and down the valley, and it's my opinion that the country, the land, is very, very happy to have more people speaking the right language out on country. But the most visible traces left from the generations of early people going back are the petroglyphs out on the landscape. And even though they use some very simple and not that many different basic symbols, they're in every imaginable configuration and they draw our attention today because a whole lot of us consider them to be very beautiful. And some are very beautiful in their complexity and how detailed and how laid out and how they fit into the landscape, and others are equally as beautiful in their simplicity. The aesthetics seem to appeal to an awful lot of modern day viewers. As I mentioned before, we believe that a lot of this rock art goes back, even here in the Owens Valley, several thousand years, based on the weathering and the repatination, the patina reforming after the petroglyph has been pecked or carved. A lot of this rock art is just not discernible unless there's some good side lighting. Some panels that look really just magnificent with the right lighting are completely invisible without side lighting. Here are some examples. As a result of all this, we believe very firmly that accurate scale drawings are very important for full documentation of any rock art site, particularly when you have very hard to discern rock art like this. Also, breaking it down into panels is a way to take bite-sized chunks out of it and try to make better sense of it, and gives you a chance to make sure that you're noting all of the graffiti or impacts that more modern people have made on the rock art. Even when the petroglyphs are pretty visible, I believe that there's a lot that you can learn by doing drawings. When you're doing drawings, you slow down, you take a much more care. It does take a lot of time, but you look at it much more carefully and you get a lot of insights into how people were putting one image over the other or next to the other, and how compositions unfolded. I'm not going to mention paintings or pictographs very much because I think that there will be a future talk on them, but I will explain them a little bit. There are petroglyphs in the Owens Valley. This is one of the brighter ones actually out on the volcanic tableland. For the most part, they're very weathered and hard to see. Some are not discernible at all. This is actually one of the most complex pictographs on the volcanic tableland, if not the most complex, but you wouldn't know it. It's in a narrow crack, only about 2 feet wide or so. And that we have this magic, a digital magic filter made by a good friend, invented by a good friend, John Harmon, called D-Stretch. You can go on the internet and find out about it. It's available. And I'm happy to say that even though 20 some odd years ago when we did drawings of these sites, we did a pretty good job of it. We got all the elements that the D-Stretch showed us. But D-Stretch has literally changed the way people record painted elements all over the world on rock art and in ruins and everything else. This is another panel on the volcanic tableland that's more like what most of the pictographs there look like. Again, D-Stretch brings it out much, much better. There are just a handful of better protected painted sites in little caves in the higher up in both of the mountain ranges. And with D-Stretch, at this particular cave, we've been able to see that later people came and put a completely different type of rock art over earlier stuff. This is one of the very few examples of paintings being made with a very fine line paintbrush, rather than, we believe that most of all the other elements appear to be painted with a fingertip because all the lines are about that wide. There's only 2 or 3 other tiny examples of pictographs being painted with something with a fine line, like this one right here. That's just not very common. It wasn't much of a thing. A little bit more further to the east, but not here in the Owens Valley. Also, the same thing for drawings, pigment stick drawings, like crayon drawings. There's only 2 or 3 examples of that in the Owens Valley. This is one of them. We just don't have much pigment, much red ochre, iron oxide and we don't know where it was coming from. But there are, like I say, a small handful of sites like this one up higher in elevation that are still protected enough to be visible. There may be quite a few more that are just almost worn away, but not that we have found. There is only one site that has numerous red handprints like this one right here. There are two other sites, I believe two, possibly three, that have little traces of one or two or three handprints, but that's it for the Owens Valley. And just like in the Eastern Mojave, the pictographs make up only a small percentage of the total. As you can see at the top, Don and all the rest of us recorded about 28,000 glyphs there and about 4,000 petroglyphs and about 4,000 pictographs. Much fewer here in the Owens Valley, but it's been a long time since we've really crunched any numbers. So documenting rock art is a lot more than just taking some pictures and putting an X on a map. You need to make maps of the site, showing where everything is. Even with GPS today, I think it's much better to have either a hand-drawn or a map that shows where everything else besides the rock art is as well, for someone to be able to see when they're at the site. But you also need to take measurements, take down what the physical and cultural context of it was to go with the photographs and the drawings. And context is the biggest word in all of science. So much has been mislabeled because it wasn't put into a proper context. And we're not really interested in what does a particular glyph mean and can we ever decipher it. We're much more interested in what else people were doing at these sites and how did the images fit into the lives of their makers. Those were the kinds of questions that Don Christensen was trying to answer when he originally started documenting all this rock art. So not only do we record the rock art, but we try to record as many of the other associated archaeological sites around the rock art sites, as well as all the other archaeological features, because the images themselves are just one small part of a much bigger picture. I got into this back in the 1980s. It was sort of at the peak of what they call the rock art wars, where everybody was trying to put out a book claiming that they had broken the code and they knew what all the rock art meant. And in general, the people who propounded any of these different ideas, the tendency was to make it monolithic, that would explain all or most of all the rock art. And I feel very fortunate that I got hooked up with someone who was just trying to see how the rock art fit in to the cultural landscape and was concentrating on getting as much recorded as possible because so little had been recorded up to that point. Like I said before, it's all about context. The two biggest theories that hit it into the public way of thinking are hunting magic and shamanism, a form of shamanism that meant groups of men going off by themselves and doing magic. And the things that they used to hold that up were that there were a lot of these depictions of quadrupeds in hunting scenes, that they were located along game trails and in remote places, and that there was a lack of habitation debris, that they weren't at habitation sites. And yet at that time, very little had been recorded. People were claiming all this without having recorded sites. So we decided to go out and collect the data and see, does that really hold up? Because at the same time, a lot of these people were taking what little bit of ethnography existed pertaining specifically to the rock art sites and trying to stretch it in all directions to try to fit into their own pet theories. And we felt that finding out what is actually in the archaeological record might tell us a lot. So in the Owens Valley, to date, we have recorded somewhere over 300 sites, most of them on BLM lands. We know of somewhere around 600 or 700 in the general region that exist, so we've barely got half of them done. I really don't know how many in Death Valley and points east or north into Nevada have been recorded, but I do know there's a lot more to do on forest lands and on DWP lands in particular around here. And just to give you a little idea, back in 2012, we did a really quick study. Courtney Smith and I did a quick study to see if the numbers that we had here coincided much with what Dawn and others and we were finding down in the Mojave. And these are the numbers that we came up with. Some things really stood up to us. Out of about 7,600 elements, we found that there were only about 100 or so elements of anything that we would call figurative. That there just really aren't any depictions of anybody hunting or fighting or all the different things that most of the public thinks is in the rock art record. The other thing that was a lot of interest to us was that it turned out a lot else was going on at rock art sites, that about half of them people were knapping tools, and that there were even a greater percentage of sites were being used for probably milling vegetal resources and processing food, also with house rings, and you can see everything is going on here. Another thing that, and again, this is a very small data set, but out of 122 sites, the preponderance of the chronologically diagnostic points seem to point to sort of a peak of production of rock art around about the time that this bow and arrow was taking over from the spear. And that seems to hold true with a bunch of other studies, but we have a whole lot of more number crunching to do to find out about that. There are, as I said, depictions of quadrupeds, bighorn sheep and deer in the Owens Valley. Not a lot though, and you're about to see most all of them in just about 5 minutes. Unless someone wants to say that this is a bunny right here, there are no depictions of bunnies in the Owens Valley. I only know of 3 in Death Valley, but they ate an awful lot of rabbits and there are no depictions of them. Here is the most famous depiction of a deer up here. And that there are no depictions of quadrupeds, bighorn sheep or deer at the largest site, Mono 7 in the Owens Valley, but this is Mono 8, Red Canyon. And I'm about to show you all of the depictions of quadrupeds at this site. It has 300 panels at this site. This boulder has almost all the quadrupeds and almost all the anthropomorphic or human-like figures at the site as well. Looking down on that boulder are these 2 panels, and that's all of the quadrupeds out of the 300 panels at a very famous site on the Bishop Loop, the Red Canyon site, Mono 8. There are also small sites that have a large, maybe 1 or just a few panels where there are a large proportion of quadrupeds, but not many. Again, remember that even now we know of less than 100 quadrupeds out of 12 or 15,000 elements that we've recorded. This other figure, is it a human-like figure? Is it a zoomorph? Don't really know. Here is another panel that is south in the central Owens Valley that is almost completely either bighorn sheep or this one lizard-looking thing. Down in the Coso Range near Olancha, there is this panel of a quadruped, of an anthropomorph doing something with a quadruped, and the interpretation is that it's a hunting scene. I'm okay with that. It fits, although that's an odd way to hunt, but yeah, that's a hunting scene. But again, we don't have any up here in the Owens Valley out of 12 or 15,000 elements. We also only have a handful of tracks of quadrupeds or any kind of a trackway. Here is one of them, not very prominent. It would be easy to miss. I believe we have 3, possibly 4 in the whole Owens Valley at only 2 or 3 sites. This is probably the most obvious one that we have. So that wasn't, tracking animals wasn't a big thing in the rock art either. Here's a very famous panel, thanks to the internet. And it appears to have a glyph that appears to be a hoof print of an artiodactyl with the dew claws pecked there as well. There is a lot of historic and ethnographic evidence for communal game drives in this area, both for bighorn sheep and for horses into the contact period. There are some of these that we have recorded on the volcanic tableland. We recorded game drive, what we believe are game drives on the volcanic tableland and in the White Mountains. There are some that have large rock walls, but they're very rare. And the most common form of what we believe to be a game drive that is all over the landscape, and a lot of them up into Nevada, are just stacks of little rock stacks that were used to hold upright posts or branches that then they would weave vegetation into to make a big wall while and use them as wings or corrals. We have exactly this one panel that I'm sure someone is going to interpret someday as being a communal game drive, but I'm just not going there. I think that's a huge stretch. Sure, maybe, but maybe really doesn't count for much as far as I'm concerned. This is an idealized shape of a bird's eye view of a communal game drive. A lot of places throughout the world make them like this. This is the ideal shape, but it changes both the wings and the corral part change quite a bit based on the topography that they're using and on the materials that they have at hand to make the corral. This is an image that has been called in print a picture of someone shooting a bow and arrow. That's been cited by other people, that interpretation. I am not buying that at all, because when I drew it, that's not at all what I saw when I was recording. This is also at the largest petroglyph site here, Chalfont Valley, Mono 7. Here is that drawing, and to me, it looks like a headless, armless male anthropomorph with a burden basket. If someone asked me to interpret it, and I don't know what that means at all, but that's what it looks like to me. This is literally most, maybe 3/4 or more of all of the anthropomorphic figures on the volcanic tableland, and almost all of the face-like petroglyphs of the entire Owens Valley. Out of 130 sites on the volcanic tableland, that's not very many human-like figures. There aren't any two exactly alike, but this one in the center right here is particularly interesting because the little headdress, we really don't have, headdresses aren't a big thing in the Mojave and the Great Basin, and those buffalo horn looking headdresses and the sort of like he's holding two snakes. Again, here I am saying what it looks like to me. That does not mean what it is. Here's what that image, how it fits into the big composition of the whole panel. This is at Mono 8, the Red Canyon site. This is the boulder itself. Note how the bottom of the boulder is eroding off. I think that might be because someone lit a fire long, long ago at the base of the panel. There aren't many petroglyph depictions of hands in the Owens Valley. Oddly enough, there are to the north, but there are a number of depictions of what we're calling snakes. If it's a wavy line or a zigzag line with a thickening at one end, we put it in a category called snakes. This is a good indication of how different lighting really shows these elements a lot better in good lighting. There are some lizards, not a lot, not a handful, again, in the Owens Valley, not many. This is a rock that at least one family of birds really enjoys using. And I find it interesting because right next to it is the only panel that I'm aware of in the Owens Valley that has an image that I'm fairly safe in saying at least looks like a bird. There really aren't any others that I can think of. So it's sort of interesting that it's occurring right next to this rock. Footprints. The footprints occur at a number of sites, not a lot, but a few, but particularly at both Mono 7 and Mono 8, Chalfont and Red Canyon. Red Canyon in particular has a lot of these footprints going up and across many different panels at the site, on bedrock and on vertical panels. Some are very small, like children's footprints. And a lot are just normal human sized, adult size, but there are some that are much larger, almost like a giant or a big bear with big claws. And some have 4 toes and one has 9 toes. I'm not aware of anything here that has 9 toes. Bird tracks, 1 or 2 bird track looking glyphs do occur at a number of sites, but as far as a trackway, there's only 2 or 3 sites that have something like this, that where it appears to be trackways of bird tracks. This is on bedrock at Mono 7, on top of the cliff actually, and it has both either human or these bear-looking tracks in conjunction with a bunch of the bird tracks. In the upper right here is a drawing of that same panel. North of the Owens Valley, for some reason, there are a lot more sites that have hands, petroglyph hands, and not very many. I haven't found any yet that I don't know of any. None with footprints come to mind. Let's put it that way. Another element are vulva form. These occur all over throughout the Owens Valley and into Nevada and pretty much everywhere in the Western archaic tradition. But in the literature search, you find that people made a lot of claims about it that really don't seem to be held up by the archaeological record, because a lot of these claims were made without having a very large database before they began making claims, going back again all the way into the 70s or 60s or 70s or 80s. In this instance, they're mentioning that these are restricted to only a few sites. However, a couple of years before, Courtney Smith and I had published a paper of a quick study of 81 petroglyph sites and found that we found these elements at actually about 50% of them. And they are likely the most common figurative element in the Owens Valley, if you want to call them figurative, and they do occur throughout the entire range of the Western archaic tradition. This is, in fact, at the Chalfont site, but it's another good example. Without side lighting, this is an invisible panel, pretty much. There are a lot of these images occur to the north and west into Nevada. And there are only about 3 or 4 female anthropomorphs in the Owens Valley, but there is one panel north of the Owens Valley that has 5, and I'm not aware of any other like it in anywhere in the Great Basin or the Mojave. Just female anthropomorphs are pretty rare. But the vulva form image itself occurs in a lot of different contexts, in varying compositions of rock art, from great big panels to small panels. Here are a few of them. It seems also that it's an image that was made throughout the entire time that petroglyphs were made in the Owens Valley, going way back, very, very weathered to very recent. The most uncommon figure that we have in the Owens Valley only occurs at one site. Well, these two different figures, the big shield looking figure and the big figure with a beak or a nose. These only occur at the Chalfont Mono 7 site. We don't know of any others quite like them around. Some have fringes on them. They very much look like shield-like figures that you would see back in the Southwest or up into the Plain States. But there's a lot more to say about these, and I'll save them for a future talk. But this is the only site that we know of that these occur for a very, very long ways. Another thing that we have here that's very strange, if anybody else has seen any of these, I would very much like to hear from you. It's an area about the size of a human head, a circle or an oval that's been pecked out or abraded, and then a pigment has been applied, usually in a geometrical sort of a form, and or pecked out in a way to make part of the image be paint and part of it be a petroglyph. There's better ways to explain that, but here are a couple of examples. And the only other, besides on the tablelands and in one little area in the White Mountains, the only other place that we know of these is in eastern Nevada between Las Vegas and St. George. And if anybody has seen any of these between here and there, I would really like to hear about it. Thank you. There are other ways that pigment was used in conjunction with the petroglyphs. Here are a couple of examples. It's usually always very, very faded and or just traces of the pigment. At some point in the prehistoric past, a few petroglyphs were painted in red, but never have we seen a whole panel that happened to. Usually it's just little connecting lines rather than elements like that one. So anthropomorphic figures are the things that attract us the most. Our eyes go straight to them. We have the most empathy towards them. They're what we focus on. So we think that there are more than there really are when we visit a site. But the thing is that all figurative elements in this Western archaic tradition in the Mojave and so far in the Great Basin where we studied only come up to about 2 to 3% of the total. And that leads us to a question too of what is figurative and what is non-figurative. Is this an anthropomorph, or is this just a bisected circle with attached lines and other circles? You have to figure out something to call it so we can put it into a column to count it. Is this a stylized female anthropomorph? What do you think? What category should we put this into? Here's another panel. Okay, if these are figurative elements, what are they figures of? Is there one figurative element on this panel, or two, or none? So you've seen that Owens Valley petroglyphs take on all different shapes and sizes and seem like a great range of image making, but they're really not. They've all fall into this one big, under this one big umbrella, but the foundation, the keystone image of the Owens Valley, and particularly the volcanic tableland, are these circles with interior lines, interior crossed lines. They are just ubiquitous at most all sites. One way or another, you end up finding something like this. Not all, but the vast majority. You can use Photoshop to up the contrast just a little bit. D-stretch doesn't usually work very well with petroglyphs. It does in some cases though. Sometimes these panels are very, very busy and it seems as though they were just crammed together, although there isn't that much superpositioning going on here. And an awful lot of the rock art on the tableland, not the majority, but at certain large sites, the rock is extremely friable and weathering a lot quicker than the other rock. I will say that it was no fun at all to draw this panel. At some point, you just have to throw up your hands and say, that may or may not be, but I can't. Rock art on harder rock, such as basalt like this, lasts much longer. And we have the same type of elements also on harder rock like basalt. You see a lot of the same panel using not only pecking, but also abrading, scratching, and sometimes incising. All on the same panel, sometimes on the same glyph. So there's an anthro on this panel. So is that figurative? Are those two faces? Do I make those faces, or are those just dots and circles on a big non-figurative panel? It's not that easy. Another form of human expression on rocks are this is north of the Owens Valley at the north end of the Whites, are cups or cupules, something that occurs all over the world. In many places, they're considered to be the earliest form of visual expression that still exists. These are very, very weathered and they're on very hard rock. But we also know that the manufacturing of these cups happened throughout the time that rock art was made, or at least sporadically, perhaps continuously, but right up into contact times, because we see an awful lot that don't show any repatination. Statistically, they do seem to be related to grinding slicks in many, many cases. There are a lot of them that are in or around habitation sites. Not all of these are ones that are positioned in a way that you think that they were used for food preparation. Some are, but some obviously aren't. Here is a boulder out in the middle of the volcanic tableland in a habitation site that has a number of cupules or small mortars and vulva form, and down off the side a small anthro, a small non-gendered anthro. No milling slicks. Also, cupules are quite often with mortars, and perhaps they're just the beginning of a larger mortar. Sometimes these are on more vertical walls that makes it hard for you to believe they were ever processing any food with it. And other times the cupules are worked right into rock art panels, petroglyph panels. Such as this very, very beautiful panel where the cupules appear to have been put over the top of the panel after the petroglyphs were put on there. There are also boulders, either single boulders or clusters of boulders in very remote, to us, remote areas away from habitation sites on trails and in canyons coming out of the Sierras as well. This is that very famous 13 Moons panel again. It's gotten very famous since the internet and is seeing a lot of visitation these days. Another thing that we have here is repecking. This entire panel was completely repatinated, and then someone came later and pecked it out so you can see it again. So the panel is actually very, very old, but the arrow shows where parts of the earlier patina from the first time it was pecked were not pecked the second time around. And the same thing, I believe is true for this great big panel, what's called the Sky Rock, that is near to 13 Moons, has the same things going on with it, that it appears as though the entire panel was pecked a long time ago. It nearly completely repatinated, and then someone came more than 100 or 200 years ago and pecked it all out again. I'm not sure what that indicates, except that someone was reusing that panel for a very long time. Lighting is very important when you visit sites. You can visit sites at different days or different days of the year or different times of day and see completely different things. It's just my opinion, but to me, the rock art looks like it belongs there, unlike our graffiti or our houses or campers or anything that we put out in the land that looks like it doesn't belong there. These panels to me look like, as some indigenous people claim, like they were there back in the time of creation. They look like they are have become a part of that landscape and belong there. They're part of the story of this country. In softer rock, there are quite a few cases of abrading, sanding down images to make them like bas relief. Predominantly, that's mostly at the Chalfont site. Occasionally, you see incised lines by themselves, but mostly they're on panels where there's other, in very soft rock, where there's other things going on. Chalfont is the main site. I'm only aware of one boulder in the whole Owens Valley that has what in the Southwest and in other parts of the world, and in a lot of the world, people call these tool sharpening grooves. I have yet to see any tools in the archaeological record that could be sharpened by doing that to a boulder. But, and plus there's only one of those boulders in the whole Owens Valley. So something that we forget sometimes is that this is living country. There, it looks barren to us sometimes. We're out in the middle of the day looking at things, but the country is full of lots of inhabitants that live there. And the earlier people were much more in tune and in touch with all those different inhabitants than we are today. I'm sure that all of these plants and animals were part of the stories that those people had about their country. Many of those inhabitants have their own personalities and their own attitudes, and they do show up in quite a few of not just here locally, but quite a few indigenous stories all over the world. They animals are considered to be kin, to be family with human beings. So a question that a lot of people would ask is, why bother? Why anybody care about this old stuff from people that are long dead? And the easy answer is that some of us believe this is very incredibly beautiful and information that needs to be protected. But and also the vandalism, we see that everywhere. It goes back in time, right back to the time when there were cowboys were running around shooting at rock art panels. But there's a lot of other vandalism and graffiti that goes on today. The lower right here is the only one in the Owens Valley. The other panels here are in the Southwest or the Mojave. Greg Haverstock here is standing in front of one of the panels that was stolen in 2012. Here are photos of some of those other panels that were taken. Although supposedly Mono 7 had been recorded several times and had even been nominated for a National Historic Register nomination, there were no pictures of these panels that law enforcement could get access to when this happened in 2012, other than some that we had done. Although we hadn't completely recorded the site at that time, we were able to furnish these of the panels that were missing, and based on publishing them, these panels were anonymously returned not long after. There are a big group of people in America who seem to have little or no respect for the land itself, or for other cultures, or for petroglyphs, or either cultural or natural resources. And we need to fight back against that. We need to have more people out there stopping them when they're doing this kind of stuff, monitoring sites, reporting to law enforcement so that this kind of behavior can be curtailed. The Owens Valley has seen a whole lot of impacts from people who apparently just do not care about the land. And we need people out there monitoring these sites. We were fortunate here to have a lot of people, the Friends of Inyo, Friends of Fish Slough, Audubon Society, Native Plant, everything else. Anyway, okay, move on. Hunter-gatherers, we use that term today, or us modern people, mostly to tell jokes about ourselves more than anything else. But we forget that while the petroglyphs that I'm talking about tonight are the legacy from the ancestors of the local Paiute and Shoshone people, everybody, I don't care who you are, if your family came over on the Mayflower, you only have about 200 to 300 generations of ancestors who were agriculturalists, pastoralists, or industrialists like today. But every single human being on earth has at least 6,000 to 10,000 modern human generations of ancestors who were hunter-gatherer, fisher-forager type peoples who had incredibly rich lives, and they learned a lot. They passed on that knowledge to each other. We give lip service to the fact that, oh, these were very complex people, but our culture really, we only just give that lip service. We fail to really sit and think about how their lives were every bit as important to them and their families and their loved ones. The adventures that they had, the loves in their life, the fun that they had with each other. In no way are any of our lives today any more vital and important to our people than theirs were to their people. And we need to really keep that in mind. They learned a lot. They passed it on to their children, who passed it on down through the generations all across the world. And it's my belief that, and a lot of my colleagues' belief, that there is a lot that we could learn from this indigenous knowledge that could help us do a much better job of taking care of our own countries and our world and each other going into the future. Back off the soapbox, and I would just like to say that nothing I'm saying tonight is new. It was actually Australian researchers that first noticed the big global similarities between all this. And I'm very happy to say that right now our data from the Owens Valley is being used by researchers in Western Australia on some of the first comparison studies of arid lands rock art, global comparison studies of arid lands rock art. And I'm very pleased that we could have contributed some information to those studies. So Robert Bednarik, who was the founder of the International Federation of Rock Art Organizations, looked at it this way. These numbers are not up to date. Actually, we've been making stone tools for what, more like 3 million years now. Rock art, we know, has been produced for closer to 60,000 years, I think is now the number. And we're learning more about Australia, but in general, all over the world, it just hasn't been made for several generations. Some of the similarities of why I think it makes sense to compare the Owens Valley and the Great Basin to Australia is that all these right here, we were already modern humans when we did the migrating. We had developed spiritual and symbolic systems before we migrated, and we adapted to major environmental changes both before and after those migrations. We learned a lot through all that. We should tie into that knowledge. These numbers are also out of date. Some people in Australia for more like 60,000 or more years, people in the New World for maybe 13, 15,000. We're still learning about that. But the hunter-gatherer lifestyle persisted in Australia and in the Mojave and the Great Basin right up until the time of contact. As far as the rock art is concerned, a big similarity is that what we call Western Archaic is the most widespread tradition in the Americas. The Panoramity tradition in Australia is the most widespread in Australia. They both appear to have the greatest time depth of any rock art traditions. They're both predominantly non-figurative. What else? Here's some examples. So we'll go back to those examples of Western Archaic rock art: circles, wavy lines, connected lines, this type of thing. In the Panoramity tradition in Australia, it's pretty much the same thing, a much greater emphasis on trackways, bird tracks and kangaroo tracks and other animal tracks. But in general, this is the same stuff we've been looking at throughout this whole talk tonight. I believe that it was Robert Bednarik who first made this big connection, but it could have been someone else earlier than that. He's the first one that I'm aware of. These are the same symbols we see used here all the time. If we found panels like this in the Owens Valley while we were out survey, we would wonder where the heck that rock came from, but we wouldn't bat an eye at the petroglyphs themselves. Australia is the place that has the most ethnography concerning rock art. And there are still many groups who still use images like this to tell stories and in their art. And researchers were told going back into the 60s and 70s, or be earlier than that, that very simple images like this can have multiple meanings, many different meanings in when they're used to tell stories. And researchers were told over and over and over, as we were told with the work that we did in Australia, that these are only the unrestricted meanings. These are only the meanings that can be told to people who are not initiated into the knowledge of that particular site or those particular group of people. Nancy Munn, this is probably one of the most cited books in Australia concerning that type of thing. Nancy Munn did her work in the 60s, and she found that these images can be used for different reasons, different kinds of art that sometimes are separate from the others and sometimes they overlap. And you need to be a member of that society to know which is which and when one or the other is appropriate. So the take-home messages really are in understanding the rock art that even very simple symbols like circles and lines can really be used to relay very complex information, that information concerns all aspects of traditional and spiritual life of that particular country, and that you really need to be a member of that society, of that group, of that language group for you, and to be initiated into the different levels to understand the knowledge that's behind and that those images are a part of. So to my way of thinking, with the years that I've put into this, and this is my opinion, I have come to think of most of the rock art as being a product, one of the things that earlier people used to help them tell stories that would help them get along better with each other and to take better care of each other and of their country. That's the overall, if you got to put it into a nutshell, it's that these images were used to pass on a group's worldviews to each successive generation to help instill in them a respect for their culture and for the land that they call home. And if we're smart, we can make it a priority to teach our children the same type of respect. And we can use the fact that our archaeological information and our ethnographic information and everything that these indigenous people have been trying to tell us for hundreds of years is information about how to take better care of things, really. So I'm going to end this whole thing on a management high note. That once again, I want to thank those people who are the land managers who have an extremely difficult job taking care of the natural and the cultural resources on BLM, National Forest, and Park Service lands. And I'm just going to throw this out there that in my opinion, their budgets and their staff just cannot keep up with the amount of people that are out there on the land now. And options are either to just watch these resources vanish, or to put fences around them and lock them up, or more and more people, the public, can go to the land managers and ask what they can do to help. It's really going to take a much more effort by all of us in order to protect both our natural and our cultural resources. We can't just sit back and blame the federal agencies for not doing the kind of job we think they should be doing. In my opinion, we all need to be doing more. So anybody can help. I want to thank all those people who belong to the Friends of Inyo and Friends of Fishlu and everything else. But if you would like to help with the rock art and the archaeological resources, you can learn more by going to the California Archaeological Site Stewardship Program. And we have a program here. All Western states that I'm aware of have such a program. Another thing you can do is either donate your time or help out with, we are appreciate and we depend on donations to help us continue to do this work. White Mountain or Western Rock Art Research and there are other groups in America, not so much here in the Great Basin and the Mojave, but in the Southwest and other places. There are other people and groups that are trying to get out and record and manage the rock art. You can help them. Here is my information that it will be on the YouTube panel if you want to get in touch with me, YouTube channel for White Mountain Research Station. And I think that's just about it. I'm wrapping this up right now. Please feel free to contact me. If we can answer some questions here at the end of the talk, that would be great. Otherwise, I can answer questions later. So I think you're going to have to kick me off because I can't do the stop share again.
All right, I'll do that. Thank you
Okay,
so
thank
much,
you.
David. And then I have to stop sharing mine. And then we're back to our regularly scheduled programming. Thank you again. In the chat, I did include the URL for the California stewardship program that David had mentioned. And then below that is a URL, excuse me, for our YouTube channel at White Mountain Research Center, where you can watch his last talk and watch this one that is being recorded this evening. Also, if you are a Bishop Tribal member, the Cultural Center does offer cultural monitoring workshops and trainings. You usually have to contact the TIPO officer or the Cultural Center. There are some questions in the chat here that I can read to you if you would like to answer them, David.
You bet.
Let me see, I gotta put it down here. So Joanne brings up, I think, a pretty common question that people ask when it comes to rock art. Would you comment, please, on the apparent contradiction of treasuring ancient graffiti and disdaining the graffiti of modern times?
I don't consider any of this graffiti, and I think I'll just leave it at that. I'm not sure what you think graffiti is, but this we have a vast amount of information to show that this is not the rationale behind making these images is nothing like the rationale of why people today make graffiti. So it's completely comparing apples and oranges.
Let's see, Wendy made an interesting comment about, nothing has 9 toes to make a print like that, a footprint, and then it might be a fringed basket. So like an
Yes, that's a good call. Yep.
Observation.
Yeah.
Let's see. David has a question. David K. Explain the paucity of lizard and small mammal glyphs, assuming both were abundant, birds too.
I can't explain that at all. I can't explain why there are no pictures of anyone making a house or collecting plants or hunting or processing food or eating food or building a fire or all of the things that people are doing or any of the artifacts that people use. There's no depictions of clothing or that we can make out houses or anything else. I can't explain that at all. Nope. No explanation that I can come up with other than that there are rigid making rock art was very regimented. There were certain things that you just couldn't, that's why it's not graffiti. If it was graffiti, people would be drawing pictures of everything, and there's a very limited array of what images that they were using and how they were using them. And not everyone was allowed to make rock art. For one thing, there'd be faces, right? Everybody saw faces every day. Why are there only 5 faces out of 15,000 glyphs unless there's some taboo against doing them? If it was graffiti, there would be faces everywhere. Hope that answers that.
Let's see, Todd Gillens. I'm sorry if I butcher people's names in the comments. I do apologize. Todd says, thank you so much. I do remember you mentioning water as a reference as zigzags. They sure look like water in streams. What are your thoughts?
They
This is all
certainly do.
subjective. Yeah.
Yep, they certainly do look like water. My mentor, Don Christensen, is fond of saying that the most dangerous words in rock art research are "that looks just like." But I agree with you that they, in some cases, and as you saw from my chart there of the definitions that are given by people who use those images, sometimes that can be water, but it can also mean many other things. So that is one of the definitions that may have been what the producer of that image meant, but we have no way of knowing that.
Let's see, George Zhang, he's been pretty active in the chat. He's asking, are all of these rock art on the same rock material? And I may be assuming he's referring to Owens Valley rock art.
On the volcanic tableland, they are all on Bishop Tuff, but on the rest of the Owens Valley, there are very few petroglyphs other than cupules on granite, but they occur a lot on basalt and on other slate and shale and things like that. But most of what I showed you and everything on the volcanic tableland is on Bishop Tuff.
Okay. See, Ray Klein has a question. Were these the same people that constructed the water diversion channels west of Bishop?
They, in my opinion, they certainly were. I'm not sure exactly about all those dates on the water diversion dams, but we certainly believe that rock art was being made during the times that those diversion dams were being used. Yes, and certainly by the ancestors of those people. Yes.
Mm-hmm. I think Greg Haberstock could probably answer that question with the dating. We do have a recorded talk about the recent research done on radiocarding dating some of the water features made by Paiute people. I had a question, David. You know, people ask about the availability of your book about the rock art here. And you said it was available at 2 museums. I think I've seen it at the Eastern California Museum in Independence. Where's the other museum?
At the Laws Railroad Museum.
Laws. Okay. Okay.
And it's not available online or anywhere. I put it out in 2016 and have given out a lot of copies to tribal members for review. And it's still in that state right now, but it's still available. I haven't gotten much comments back, but it's still available at the Eastern California Museum and at the Laws Railroad Museum. Or again, you can contact me. You saw my information was up there, and I'll get you a copy as well.
See, David K has another question. Vulva form images seem abundant. Is that true elsewhere around the globe?
They certainly occur elsewhere. There are certain places in Australia where female figures actually outnumber male figures by a large percentage. In a few places in Australia, the image itself does occur all over the world. I think it's much more common right here. It doesn't seem to be as common in the Mojave, or Courtney Smith thinks that it's not as common, and he knows a lot more about it than I do, out into Nevada, further away from here, as it is right around here. But there seem to be a lot of them here. They in a lot of places in Nevada, wherever there is that white, tough, real friable rock, that seems to be where a lot of big panels with a lot of them on it seem to happen. I know that's the case. There's a paper written by Alana Woody and Alvin McLean many years ago about all the ones in Nevada that are like that.
David's all, well, then we know who is in charge then, or should be. I think he's making a reference to us women. Let's see, I also have an announcement before we wrap up our Q&A this evening. I did also include our public email address if you would like to send David any more questions about this evening. If you didn't happen to catch his email address, we stay in pretty constant contact with him. We are hosting another virtual lecture on Thursday, March 16th. We have 2 more talks after this evening. So we've kind of like piling them up, kind of like, this winter weather. And ironically enough, avalanche scientist and forecaster Sue Burrick will be speaking, and she will be discussing the relationships between specific weather, climate, and snowpack factors that contributed to our local avalanches in January and December and our atmospheric river events. And you can register to attend that at our website, WMRC.edu. That talk will also be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel. I included the URL in the chat as well. With that being said, this will be our last call for questions or comments. If I did miss your comment or question in the chat, I do apologize. We did have a lot of participation. It is always greatly appreciated. Okay, here's one from Lisa. I'm simply curious, how can you be certain that the glyphs are not, as the Chaco Canyon Visitor Center posts, posits tribal symbols and thus a mark similar to modern graffiti? And that was from her 16-year-old son.
I have real problems with Chaco Canyon using the word graffiti in their poster. That's about all I can say about that. And yes, I disagree with them completely with what the sign apparently at Chaco Canyon said. And our culture has tried to make this out to be graffiti for a very long time. And I don't think we're getting anywhere. The archaeological record shows, once again, that look at how many things that they saw every day that they didn't do any pictures of. So what is not in the rock art record is just as important as what you do see in the record. And that, again, that's my opinion.
Okay, wait, what date for the next talk that George is asking? March 16th. And that's on a Thursday. We typically host our talks on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Excellent. For more praise, thank you for sharing the great photos. Many, many thanks. As we say in Owens Valley, Paiute Manahobo, thank you. And yeah, if anyone else has any more questions, please email us. And I think it might be dinner time. What do you think, David?
I think so too. Yep.
All right, excellent.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Okay, Pat, I am going to save that question. I'm going to email it to David and I will get you a response sent back. All righty, I will take care of that. And all right, everyone have a good evening and we'll see you next month for our next talk. All righty, good night.
Good night.